Okay. So, Dr. Zadi, if we can discuss the initial concepts again before we move forward.
Okay, yes, I think that is a good idea. And I will be very brief, but mostly as physicists and engineers know, the physics done before 1900 was like this. We have three-dimensional Cartesian coordinate axis, x, y, and z. This is a frame of reference. Here we can measure motion if a particle goes from point A to B. The important thing is any motion, motion of a car, motion of a bullet, or motion of a planet, whatever happens, happens in time t. And this t is not zero. Okay, this is important. Now, uh, we consider three space axis and one time axis. There are different coordinate systems, but this is a Cartesian coordinate system, which is simple to imagine for most people. So the speed of light was measured before. It was 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. It was known. So very simple equation for constant speed, things moving with constant speed is x is equal to vt. Okay, that's what. Very high, time to reach from A to B will be very small. Okay, so nothing moves. I mean, the idea here is, if you consider the Newton's law, F is equal to ma, you apply force, acceleration will produce. Acceleration means rate of change of speed, okay, with respect to time. So if you apply more force, more will be acceleration, means speed will keep increasing. The idea here is, if you apply infinite force, then particle will move definitely more than the speed of light, right? So this was the idea before 1900s. Okay, so let us see and just see a summary what 1900 physics led us. Okay, the 1900 physics showed us the following conclusions. No limit for particle speed. That means you apply infinite force, you can keep increasing the speed, right? So according to Newton's second law, F is equal to ma. Now also 19 before 1900s, it was known position and momentum of a particle can be measured in any order. Momentum means P is equal to mass into velocity of the particle. So like a bullet is moving 500 meter per second, bullet is say 5 gram. So I can convert it into kilogram and multiply, and then I can calculate the momentum. So momentum is a critical quantity. Here saying means whether I measure during the motion position of the bullet or momentum of the bullet first, and then later moment, first I measure momentum and then I measure the position, I should get zero. That means that order is not important. Order of measurement is not important. This is classical. Also, you see, at that time, two theories were very much established. Number one, mechanics, classical mechanics, which solves all the problems of terrestrial motion, that means motion on earth, like you throw a ball, throw a stone, or you throw a packet through aeroplane, or you send a satellite outside. This all is clear and can be done by classical physics. Okay, and of course you fire a gun, all the paths are predicted by classical physics. But there was another pillar of physics, which was electromagnetic theory, that was also verified experimentally. And the idea of that electromagnetic theory, of course, electromagnetic theory by what was modified, four equation by Maxwell, it showed that electromagnetic waves propagate freely in free space. That means you don't need, wave propagate freely with a speed which is the speed of light. So that established light basically is electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic phenomenon. Okay, so this unifies two branches of physics, electricity and magnetism. and electromagnetic radiation. Like when we do this, C is equal to 1 over square root epsilon naught mu naught, which are epsilon and mu are fundamental constants of electric and magnetic fields. So C emerges from these two constants. That means C, the speed of light, is also a fundamental constant. So now radiation is absorbed and emitted in a continuous manner. This was also an effect of electromagnetic theory, and this is how it was before 1900. So before 1900, you could explain pretty much many things on the large scale. But again, the thing is, then why we worry too much, you know? So, well, the problem is when you do experiment, you generate numbers, and that numbers generated must be within the limit of error, should be verified by theory. Then when theory and experiment match, so we are moving, then science moves ahead. This is the spirit we are moving. So in 1900, some experiments was done. The first one you can see is black body radiation. Now in this what is black body radiation? I mean, you can take any object, not necessarily black color. You can take a metal object, make a little hole, or you can take a carbon black ball and make a hole and study this radiation, what wavelengths are coming from here. Okay, so wave motion was known, of course, before 1900, where there are water waves, there are other waves. So waves have a frequency and waves have a wavelength, right? And there is a relation, wave velocity and frequency and wavelength. So these waves were studied in 1900, and this was a big problem. Why this was a big problem? Few things were noted in this experiment. You see, if you heat a body at 500 degrees centigrade, then you produce this curve. If you heat the body at 1000 degrees centigrade, you produce this curve. You go to 2000 degrees centigrade, you will produce curve like this, more high. So, but these two things to note. One thing to note is this maximum shifts towards the lower side of the wavelength. When you heat a body more and more, the wavelength shifts towards the lower wavelength or higher frequency. So this is one thing to note. Now these curves, these are experimental curves, right? This is plotted intensity versus wavelength. Now what happened is when electromagnetic theory tried to explain this, what they could get mathematically was only this dotted line. So classical theory, classical electromagnetic theory could not explain these experimental curves. So this was a big problem. And this problem was solved by Max Planck first time. What he did, actually all the classical theory was on the assumption that radiation is absorbed and emitted in a continuous fashion. That means if I am irradiating some, say, carbon ball, then it will absorb some radiation in 10 minutes, more radiation in 20 minutes, 30 minutes more, 1 hour more, like this. So what cannot happen in 10 minutes probably will happen in 60 minutes, right? So this is the idea, because 60 minutes it will absorb more radiation. So this was the idea, continuous absorption and emission from the black body. But what happened is, since nobody could explain these curves, Max Planck gave a new idea that radiation is not absorbed continuously, but it is absorbed in a discontinuous fashion. And the discontinuous fashion, he said, is this one. E is equal to h, this is called Planck's constant, and multiplied by the frequency of the radiation. When he assumed this, I mean, like when nobody was able to explain using classical theory, then he assumed this. And by assuming this, he developed this energy distribution formula. Energy is equal to H divided by this complex factor. You don't need to worry about this. But the basic assumption is E is equal to H. So when he plotted this formula, then you can see the results. This solid, this dots here in this curve, this is intensity of cavity radiation. Cavity radiation means this. This is the wavelength. So dotted line is experimental lines. Experimental dot, all the dots are experimental. So on all the curves, you can see experimental dots. The solid line is Planck's formula, due to Planck's formula. What energy distribution he derived from assuming E is equal to h nu is this. So this fits completely with the experimental formula. That means his assumption that energy is absorbed and emitted on basic level is not continuous, but it is actually discontinuous. This was one proof of his assumption of E is equal to h nu, discontinuous absorption and emission. I mean, like here the idea is light is composed of packets of energy. Okay. Now each packet is called quanta. So either whole quanta is absorbed or no quanta is absorbed. There is no half quanta. So this is quantum, you can say, absorption and emission, and that explains this completely. Another experiment in this regard is this photoelectric effect. You see, some people did this experiment. I mean, I can just tell you a little. If you take a white light, this experiment I did in 9th grade, and most of the people have done it. You take a glass prism and you will see these 7 colors of light. Red is the least energetic color. Violet is the most energetic color. Okay, so you can take sun white light and you can disperse in 7 different colors. Now, sunlight is of course composed of all these colors. So what happened is, if you take a metal plate, someone, I don't remember the name, did this experiment. They put here ultraviolet light or green light, and they see from copper electrons are emitted, and here is a current. This current, since it was coming, you stop the photons or electromagnetic this light, there will be no current in the circuit. So when they thought, okay, if this violet light can do, all other colors must do. But in some metals, you can see that violet light throws the electron out and current in the circuit starts. But if you put the red light, nothing happens. Now, if you, if continuous absorption and emission is true, okay, if it doesn't happen in 10 seconds or 1 minute, maybe it will happen in 10 minutes. Electrons here will get enough energy and they will absorb energy and they will move. But you irradiate with red light with, say, whole week, nothing will happen. But if you put a violet light, depending on the metal, if you put violet light, instantly you see current in the circuit. That means this absorption and emission depends how much energy these individual photons have. And here photons behave like a particle. They strike the electron, transfer the energy, and it is like a billiard ball collision. Electrons go out. Okay. So this is how photoelectric effect. Now this was explained by Einstein by saying that kinetic energy of these photoelectrons, this experiment is done at BSc level, many people do it everywhere. Kinetic energy is equal to hc over lambda minus E naught. E naught is called work function of the metal. Different metals are different. Like suppose sodium will emit electron very quickly, but copper may not so quickly. So for sodium, you can see emission by even red light, but copper will emit maybe by blue or indigo light. I don't remember exactly. but different metals are different due to their ability to electron, how easily electron can be ejected from. So this shows actually the particle behavior. Yeah, so this shows that photons behave in this case like billiard ball particles. So there is a wave behavior, there is a particle behavior. With these two experiments, it shows. Now, if we consider Einstein's special relativity and this problem that, okay, I have a suppose iron ball, I apply force. Initially it was at rest. I apply force, it starts moving 10 meters per second. I apply more force, we move 20 meters per second. More force, 30 meters per second. So can I keep applying force and its speed will keep increasing and increasing? The answer is, if you think by Newtonian mechanics, F is equal to ma, force, you will see that yes, there is no reason to think that speed will not increase. Speed increase means increasing kinetic energy. Kinetic, because kinetic energy is half mv square. V is the velocity, m is the mass of the ball. So this means kinetic energy of a body classically will increase infinitely, and velocity will increase infinitely. This is pre-1900 concept. But when Einstein came and he gave his theory of special relativity, then with those assumptions, if you plot kinetic energy and speed, you see what this graph shows, that kinetic energy real is like this. This is the speed of light. So you apply force, some speed increases little, but eventually the particle which has a mass m never attains speed c. So the limit, no particle can ever attain speed of light, no matter how much force applied. This we see every day in particle accelerators, like CERN and everything. You take charged particle which has a mass, you apply hell of a potential, and it never attains the speed of light. So what collision they are doing is 0.99 c or something like this, but never c. Now, what happens is, this is Einstein's formula for mass. M is equal to rest mass divided by 1 minus v square by c square. This factor is called beta. Now, or gamma, some people, yeah, I think some people, mostly it is said gamma. Now, if speed is very small compared to the speed of light, then this factor is 0. That means mass is equal to the rest mass. So fired bullet moves about 500 meters per second. That is nothing compared to the speed of light. So there you don't see relativistic effects. You see relativistic effects when you approach speed of light only. So common in speeds which are daily life speeds, or firing rocket, firing bullets, firing missile or whatever, these are much smaller than the speed of light. So you don't see any relativistic things over there. Okay, so this establishes, of course, that speed of light is the limit and no material particle can cross it. So that idea that speed will increase by F is equal to ma, applying more and more force, is not valid when you approach to the speed of light. Okay? That is due to the relativity. Now, yes, if in this formula you put something very close to c here, you will see that mass will increase. Mass as a function of velocity will increase. Now, that means if particle is closer to the speed of light, its inertia is more. Inertia means it is difficult to change its speed of motion. And that's what Newton's first law says. Newton's first law in this state tells, like, if you, like first law says, if there is no force on the body, it will move with a constant speed, right? Now, if a particle is moving close to the speed of light, then you need a lot of force to increase it further or decrease it, because the law says like that. So you need almost infinite force to cross the speed of light barrier. Now, there is no infinite force, right? So that's why nothing. I mean, this is what Newton's first law says. Due to inertia, it is impossible to increase speed of a particle when you are close to the speed of light, because the inertial mass of the body increases. Now, this is one thing coming from the relativity. Of course, these were four big guys. Of course, everybody, like E is equal to mc square. This is Einstein's equation, which of course used in nuclear reactors and naturally used in sun, how energy is converted, how mass is converted into energy, and we get energy from the sun, then stars and all that. E is equal to mc squared. C is the speed of light, m is the mass, and E is the energy produced. So whatever mass you have, multiply by c squared, you will get energy. E is equal to h nu. This is due to Max Planck, and Max Planck explained how energy on the basic level is absorbed and emitted. Now lambda is equal to h over p. That means wavelength of a particle. A particle has a wavelength which is Planck's constant divided by the momentum. Now momentum is mass into velocity. So this means if mass is very small, then wavelength will be significant. Like electron moving, which has a very small mass, then wavelength will be significant. But if bullet is moving, it is only 500 meters per second. It is a more mass, so wavelength will be negligible. So in daily life, if a bullet is moving or a missile is moving, we don't see waving motions. We see moving in the straight line, right? Because wavelength is very, very small. But these things have more impact when particle mass is very small and speeds are closer to the speed of light. Then you see associated wavelength, then you see all other aspects. Okay, there was one more big problem. The big problem was atomic structure. Up until 1950 or 1850 or close to 1900, it was Dalton's atomic theory, which says you can imagine atoms as spherical balls, and that's all, right? So atoms of hydrogen is different than atom of carbon. Hydrogen may be small ball, carbon is a big ball. So like this. But you know, J.J. Thomson did an experiment probably close to 1900s. What he did, he put a ubiquitous glass tube like this, and he took a cathode that is negative charge here. On there is a positive charge, positive plate anode here. Now, when he applied high potential, he saw some rays coming from here. He initially called it cathode rays coming from the cathode. And when they put positive plate and negative plate, they see they can control these rays and they can deflect. So it is deflecting towards the positive plate. So that implies the rays coming from the cathode are negative. They are particles, and if you apply electric and magnetic field, you can play with this. Okay, so that means now from where these rays are coming? These rays are coming, say, from copper cathode or gold cathode. That means if gold has negative rays, an atom is electrically neutral, that means there must be some charge distribution. And this charge distribution is, they assumed initially like this. Like if you have a cake and you have some things like plums distributed in the cake. So this kind of model they had. This was J.J. Thomson atomic model. But this model was not satisfactory, because immediately you will ask question, okay, if this negative is sitting here and positive sitting here, and we have a Coulomb's law, negative and positive charges attract, why they don't annihilate and again make zero? But that, so it was a suspicion. So there was another person, Rutherford, he did the experiment. What he did, he took a gold foil, thin, and he bombarded helium nuclei. Helium nuclei, helium is a gas. You take out 2 electrons, and then you have helium nuclei, which is alpha particle. So what he did, he took out the negatives of the helium, and this was in that time you could have done because radioactivity was known. So he took this helium nuclei, which is basically 2 neutrons inside and 2 protons, now we know it, and he used that as a bullet and he bombarded the gold foil. So if this model is correct, you see, if model of the nucleus by Thomson is correct, then alpha particles which are too heavier than these, they should move without any deflection. They should just go through, like cake should be uniform, right? But what he found, when he sends in this direction, then he find the transmitted particle in all this area. Not only all this area, even some particles here and here. That means there is something solid, which is a scattering all these particles. So that is the birth of the nuclear atom. That means what Rutherford found is there is a negative charge, yes, but there is a solid positive charge in the center of the atom, and all positive charge is concentrated here. That is called Rutherford nuclear atom, and he explains like this. If you take this alpha particle, if it hits directly here, it will rebound like this. But if it goes like this, it can scatter like this. Or if it is away from the nucleus, it will scatter less, right? So he explained like this. He said, no, there should be something very solid in the middle, and that is called nucleus. That's what he called nucleus. This term borrowed from biology. Now, another experiment done about hydrogen, which was one of the biggest puzzles almost. You take the hydrogen gas in this discharge tube, and at a low pressure, you pass electric current, electric spark. So what happens? Light will come out, you make a slit and light goes through here and put a prism here. So prism will disperse the light, what type of light it is, totally. When you do this with hydrogen, you get these lines. This is called line spectrum. And this line spectrum now needs a theoretical explanation. There was no explanation at that time. Now, instead of hydrogen, if you fill helium, then you will not see lines at these frequencies. You will see something different. That is helium spectrum. So one upshot of this thing is now you can see the spectrum of different atoms, right? And all atoms have different spectrum. So you can check the purity of a substance by looking at the spectrum, what is in there. So pure hydrogen gives this. Okay, I want to just keep it simple. Now, how to explain this? Why these frequencies? Theory must explain. Somebody looked at a lot of hydrogen spectrum and he calculated this formula. The wavelength is related 1 over lambda is equal to RH. This is a Rydberg constant, person's name who found the formula. 1 over n1 square minus 1 over n2 square. N1 and n2 are integers. So he found this. So this formula predicts all these lines. But this formula has no theoretical basis. This is just an empirical formula. You have a data and you fitted the data to find a mathematical formula. Means this is not a theory. This is just some formula which explains the experimental line. Now the big job of theory is to explain this, why we have this formula, and the formula works well for hydrogen. So we are limiting the discussion to hydrogen, which has a, we know hydrogen what it is. Okay. So now let us see this. After that, Bohr came and he proposed his model based on Rutherford's model. Now Rutherford's model was, of course, that there should be a nucleus, all the mass is concentrated here, and if there are electrons, they should be outside, rotating around this, away from different orbits. This is what Bohr said. Stable atom can be only like this. that plus looking at Rutherford's experiment, he proposed this. This is a state, this is a state, this is a state, but how these states will happen? So he said these are stationary states, okay? And difference of energy between any two states is h nu. H is Planck's constant, nu is the frequency. That means if electron is here and electron jumps from the higher state to the lower state, it will emit energy. And if you give energy to electron and it goes to the next higher state, then you have to supply that energy. So this is basically like planets around the sun, like solar system. So this is called solar system type of model. But you can see that this idea probably is similar. You see, if you look at the law of gravitation, then force is inversely proportional to constant divided by r square. Inverse square law. Coulomb's law also is an inverse square law. So something is going on which seems very similar. But you know, by giving this model, Bohr told how, from where these lights are coming. Light is emitted when electron jumps from higher orbit to the lower orbit. So he said actually light or electromagnetic radiation comes from matter. Okay, so light and matter are kind of convertible. Okay, he did not show full conversion, but what he shows that light comes from the matter. Okay, so that's what this equation shows. He assumed that these orbits are stationary, means they will not emit energy. But this assumption is against the electromagnetic theory, because in electromagnetic theory it is very clear, clearly proved that any accelerated charge emits a radiation. Now, this is a big drawback. So what actually should happen with the Bohr's atom should be this. Electron is moving, rotating around the electron, but since it is accelerated, it will lose energy. This is a calculated formula how energy loss will happen. And this electron should collapse in the nucleus by losing continuous energy, by emitting electromagnetic radiation. And it should fall in the nucleus in 10 to the power minus 11 seconds. That means atom is not stable. But we see atom is stable. If atom is not stable, nothing will exist. No molecule, no atom, no chair, nothing, because all will decay. But observation here is, so here maybe Bohr played a lot of philosophy. Since everything is stable, that means electron does not fall in the nucleus. So how to provide stability? Then he provided a kind of ad hoc hypothesis that there are at a certain distance from the nucleus some orbits which are stable. So those stable orbits are allowed states. This is what he said. So this is n is equal to 1 to, that means electron cannot rotate anywhere it likes in a stable way. Only at a certain radii it can. Then it will not radiate energy and it will be, those are stable states. So electron can be here, can be here, can be here, but not everywhere. This is called quantization of angular momentum. Angular momentum in Coulomb field is quantized. Okay, this is what he said. And Bohr, from Bohr's model, from this assumption and quantization, of course, allowed assumption, you can derive exactly this formula. By using E is equal to h nu, one level you can say one, another level you can say another, and you can exactly derive by mathematical, simple mathematics, you can derive Rydberg formula. So that gives a basis to the Bohr's theory. Of course, he has one ad hoc assumption which goes against experimentally verified electromagnetic theory, but his idea works, right? So this was the Bohr's idea, and he met a catastrophe, but he solved it. So what is the achievement of the Bohr's model? Well, energy in nth orbit is minus 13.6 electron volt divided by n square. N is a quantum number, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So energy in nth orbit will be, you just put n and you can calculate that. If you put n is equal to 1, first orbit for hydrogen atom, energy is minus 13.6 electron volt. This is called ionization potential of hydrogen, right? The stable radius can be given by these formula. So we have a picture of atom. It has a ground state. N is equal to 1 is the ground state. And there are higher orbits, which are, say, you can say 2, 3, 4, all those are called excited state. If you give electron enough energy that it just goes out of the atom, that is called ionization, ionized atom. Okay. So 5.29 into 10 to the power minus 11 meter is called Bose radius. That is radius of the first orbit of hydrogen atom is called the Bose radius. Okay. So this is a useful length in atomic physics. Now we go further. Okay. So, okay, this was, you can say, are the initial atomic theories and initial things which solved some things and gave, you can say, you can mix philosophy and you can mix experimental physics and you cook up some theory. This is what is happening around 1925. Okay, but these things were explaining experiment, right? So now we can look little bit in more detail about the wave motion, so that if you want to discuss wave, so some simple concepts must be like, this is the water waves, everybody's familiar. Many people have done this: throw a stone in a pond of water. Then what you see is the circular waves move outside. If you put a boat here, boat will move up and down, but will not move with the surface out. So these are transverse waves. Transverse waves are like sine waves. So if sine wave starts from origin, this is crest, this is trough, this is one complete wave, wavelength lambda, right? So lambda you can measure from 0 position to the next 0 position, or you can measure from any height position to the next height position, same wavelength. Now wavelength and frequency of the wave is related with this formula V. This is the wave velocity, how wave travels, right? So this is very simple idea. Now, what I want to do basically is to relate wave idea with, say, Bohr's atom. And I want to derive the alternate. I mean, I'm not the first one who is giving the idea. This idea was basically used by de Broglie first, but de Broglie's idea is this: if you have a guitar has a string and it has a fixed tension. If you disturb the guitar, you see that sound. Right? You disturb it in a different way, then you see different sound. Why different sounds? Because you see the guitar has a fixed length. So if you disturb one way, it will vibrate like this. If you disturb another way, it will vibrate like this. These all produce different sounds. Actually, with a single thread, you can disturb it in n different ways and you can make n different sounds. Okay. Now, if I want to do this thing, I mean, explain mathematically, this is the length of the guitar string. This is n is equal to first way of disturbing, second and third. Okay. Now, L length is related with the wavelength like this, n lambda over 2. Don't think about this. Okay. Just this is the most important. L is equal to n lambda by 2. So n is equal to 1, 2, 3. So you can generate n different kind of sounds using a single string. Okay. This is how guitar works. But of course, to play a guitar which other people will like, you need practice, not the only physical principle. So this is how it is. Okay. Now de Broglie gave the hypothesis. De Broglie said, you see, in classical physics, what we were saying, you shoot a bullet. it goes in a straight line. We know that, right? If I shoot a bullet in its free space, a bullet comes out 500 meters per second, it will forever go 500 meters per second. This is Newton's law. It will not stop, right? So I can predict the its path because it is going with distance x is equal to speed multiplied by 10, right? If no force, external force, it will keep moving like this. And in classical physics, we don't think it has any wavelength. But what de Broglie said, any particle, material particle moving with momentum p is equal to mv, has a associated wavelength. Now, why we don't see bullets wavelength or missile wavelength? Because their speed is much less than compared to the speed of light. When you have speed, when a particle has a very small mass and moves closer to the speed of light, which is the case of electrons in atom, then you have this thing lambda is equal to h over p value. So if here mass increases, you can see wavelength lambda will be small and small and small. So he predicted every moving particle has wavelength associated with it. Now when bullet is moving, wavelength may be 10 to the power minus 100, which means nothing. Okay, it's zero practically. So we don't see any wavy kind of thing when bullet is moving. But when electrons moving around the nucleus with a speed which is 10 to the power 6 meter per second, then it is small mass and a significant speed, right? So then these effects are important. And on the basis of that, he proposed stability of Bohr's atom. You see, Bohr's atom, it was a hypothesis, there will be a stable orbit and it is moving there. And if it is moving there, it will never emit radiation. This is an assumption. There is no proof. But this idea gave the proof. And de Broglie's atomic picture is like this. Lambda is equal to h over p. This is h over mv. This is the first orbit. It contains certain wavelengths. So if there are integral number of wavelengths, that will be the stable orbit. This is what he said. These are de Broglie waves. Okay. So de Broglie waves, now you can do the simple math. E is equal to h nu, p is equal to h over lambda, E is equal to mc square. He assumed electrons form standing waves around the nucleus. This is circular, in circular orbit. When you have 2 pi r, which is the circumference, is equal to n lambda, n is equal to 1, 2, 3. Then you have 2 pi r, n is equal to, this is h over p. This is, he replaced lambda with his equation h over mv. So angular momentum, we know it is mvr. So we have L is equal to n h over 2 pi. That means angular momentum for a stable orbit should be multiple of h over 2 pi. Usually in physics we call it h cross. So n h cross should be the angular momentum of the stable orbit. So what he did, de Broglie provided stability reason for Bohr's model. Bohr's assumed, but he mathematically provided the reason. And just I made this one to show that dimensions. You see, if this is a football, right? This is a football, this is a table tennis ball. So nucleus, you can imagine nucleus is in the center of this football. These are the dimensions of the nucleus, which contains 99% of the mass of the atom. An electron resides just on the cover of the football. So atom is quite hollow. Okay, so the whole density of the nucleus is very high, but the whole atom does not have a high density because there is a lot of empty space between the electron and this, and the mass of the electron is very small. Okay, so actually de Broglie idea provided the stability to the Bohr's theory. Now Bohr's theory, now of course this was again around 1930s still, and when this stability condition came. These days, of course, we can do much better. We can do quantum mechanics, And by quantum mechanics, we can predict this is the differential equation. When we solve, we get a wave function, and we can tell that what is the shape of the orbits. This is the basic first orbit. Okay, so we have shape of all the orbit, but for hydrogen, still from all this difficult math, we get minus 13.6 electron volt divided by n square, which Bohr got. The same thing. But of course, this is a more consistent theory. Okay, consistent theory means we have least amount of assumptions. More assumptions, theory is not good. If you have a least assumption and you can show many things, then theory is good. So this is Bohr's model, of course. So if electron jumps from higher level to lower level, it will emit a photon. So this clearly shows, I mean, this is, of course, modern day, or you can say 1960s, right? This was established by that time. So now let us see one more thing I want to show. In electromagnetism, there is a thing called fine structure constant. And this number is 1 over 137, actually very close to it, and which is not understood. Nobody knows. This, I want to say that I guess this is the idea or definition of fine structure constant. Many people have given many definitions. We know that wavelength associated with the rest mass of a particle, we can calculate. How? E is equal to h nu. This is due to Max Planck. P is equal to h over lambda. This is due to the de Broglie. E is equal to mc square. That is Einstein. If I calculate wavelength lambda from using this equation, I have h over mc. Okay. This thing is called de Broglie wavelength of a moving part. Okay, sorry. This is called Compton wavelength of electron, lambda c. I put c because of that. So this is Compton wavelength of electron. This wavelength is related with the mass of the electron, mass of the particle. So this is Compton wavelength. Now de Broglie wavelength will be, lambda d will be h over mv, mass of the particle, velocity of the particle. So if I take the ratio of these two, lambda Compton and lambda de Broglie, which I did, so I get the fine structure constant. So lambda Compton divided by lambda de Broglie, if you say, okay, suppose you are doing this in the first orbit of the hydrogen atom, you will get V over C, which is very close to 1 over 137. So this way you can derive fine structure constant of electromagnetic interactions. It is a ratio of Compton wavelength of electron with the de Broglie wavelength of electron. This is my unrecognized definition of fine structure constant, which I think it is like this because many physicists think about it. Why this number? And this number, this way you get very close to 1 over 137, and this thing is present in all electromagnetic interaction. It pops up everywhere, whatever calculations you do. So what I want to do further is model atomic theory on fine structure constant, because I think this is a very basic in electromagnetic interactions. So what I did basically is, of course, we have conservation laws, we have Newton's laws and all that, right? Now, according to the, if you consider an electron in hydrogen atom like a vibrating string. So now I am considering like it is a string vibration motion. Okay, see what I get from it. Of course, total energy must be kinetic energy plus potential, right? So if I do these calculations, I will get total energy E is equal to half 1 over 4 pi epsilon naught E square over R. This is like Coulomb potential, because Coulomb potential is E square over R, right? So now I want to transform this R. So 2 pi Rn is equal to n lambda E if orbits are quantized. Should n is for this Compton wavelengths. Lambda electron wavelength, which I said before. So I get En is equal to minus half 1 over 4 pi epsilon naught E square n lambda electron, where n is integer 1 to 3. So You carry on this calculation, you can establish n is equal to 137 n square. This n is Bohr's quantum number. This is another 1 to 3. So small n is 1 to 3 and this capital N is also, but it is related with 137. Now, in terms of Bohr's quantum number, I can write this formula 5 as like this. E137 minus half 1 over 4 pi epsilon naught E square over 137 lambda electron cross 1 over n square. Now here you see this is just like quantized Coulomb potential, because this is a number, 137 is a number, lambda electron is a constant, E charge of the electron is constant. So what it is depending on? 1 over n square. N is the only variable here. So what changes here from one orbit to another is the radius. And radius is defined by 137 lambda cross n square. So this thing is just like this, like Coulomb potential. So this equation 7 is quantized Coulomb potential. If you look from Compton wavelength of electron, not by the de Broglie wavelength of electron. Now, if I put all the constants, what I get? I get E is equal to minus 13.6 electron volt divided by n square. Same as Bohr got, same as you get from quantum mechanics and everywhere else. So this basically equation is another version of Bohr's equation. Okay. So this is, you can say, alternative formation, but this formation I like because this is very easy to remember. Because you see, this is just like quantized Coulomb potential and everybody remembers Coulomb potential. So, okay, this is one way of explaining. Right now I will say that. So now, if you want to make a picture, atomic energy level, how they are. Nucleus positive is here. This is first level. This is second level. This is, you can say this is a potential well. Our electron is trapped in a potential well. So this last level is the ionization. If electron goes above this, it is a free electron. So here formula is minus 13.6 electron volt divided by n square. N is equal to 1 to 3 are different states. So when electron is bound, it is bound in a potential well, electric potential well. Okay, which are governed by electrostatic forces, and fine structure constant is 1 over 137 in all these interactions. Now, if you are saying, okay, this is a picture which is generated by quantum mechanics, generated by Bohr's theory, and all. Actually, quantum mechanics completes it, but quantum mechanics presently is based on particle model, classical particle model. Now we are putting wave in here, so we are getting a little bit different formula, but we are getting the same thing by putting the wave idea. So now why these are important? Well, I think best explain importance of these atomic energy levels. If we don't know atomic energy levels, you cannot have laser. And now we use laser even in shopping centers to read the price tag, and we use laser to shoot down enemy missiles, and we use lasers for eye operation. So, but lasers cannot come, or you cannot make laser unless you know these electronic levels in a material. So what laser basically does, all the atoms, all the electrons in any material are normally in the ground state. So what you do, you pump electron to higher excited state. If you are pumping somewhere, you must know where you are going. So you should know this state. So this is a laser such that this has a fast transition, fast decay. They come fast, decay fast here. Many electrons get collected here. Electrons are being pumped up. Then this is a fast decay. From here is a laser transition. So all the electrons suddenly jump to this level. So, and this sudden jump creates a wave where crest and trough are together. That's why laser light does not spread. It goes like this, straight. Any color laser you make, you will see light will not diverge. Otherwise, light should diverge. A normal bulb light diverges by rule 1 over r square, right? It diverges away from the source, but laser light doesn't diverge. So this laser you cannot produce unless you know accurately what are the levels in the material, whether it is a solid state laser or gas laser or other things. So application of laser shows we have control of atomic or molecular or solid electronic levels. Otherwise, you cannot make a laser, right? But laser was made practically in 1950s. But of course, this thing has happened because there was a consistent effort towards understanding what we don't know, right? Otherwise, nothing will happen, of course. So we move further a little bit. Okay, this I talked about this quantum. I mean, this is CERN Hadron Collider. Of course, it is a 16.8 mile circumference. Here you accelerate two particles and you collide them and you see what comes out of the debris. Okay. Head-on collision imparts the maximum energy. If we do calculation according to energy and momentum conservation, we can guess what should come out or what is what which comes out. So this is a constant effort to accelerate particle like atomic particles, protons, and those, and collide them and see what comes out. Now, just to complete it, just one thing. Anderson did an experiment. He took a photon, gamma ray photon, which was 1.02 million electron volt photon, and passed close to the gold nucleus. They split into two, electron and positron, and those were split of these were detected several times. So his Anderson's experiment, which was done, I think, in 40s, provides a proof that radiation can generate matter also. So what we see here is in 1900s, Bohr's theory told radiation comes from matter. And what Anderson showed experimentally that radiation can produce matter also. You see, electron or positron is a positive electron, and electron has a negative charge. They are particles which are opposite to each other, charge-wise, mass-wise, they are same. So this is a creation of matter. Okay. So what it establishes is, you see, radiation and mass are interconvertible. Also, E is equal to mc square also establishes that mass and energy are interconvertible. Okay. So what basically was achieved by 20th century physics, and this is very thought-provoking things. If you want to summarize, no material particle can cross speed of light barrier. That means this is our limit, the fastest we can go. Speed of light in free space, that is the fastest. No matter what we do, we cannot cross this limit. Energy and matter are interconvertible. E is equal to mc square. This is how stars produce energy and many other things. In nuclear reactor, we do the same thing. We use this equation to calculate how much fuel will burn and how much energy will come. At atomic and molecular level, particle motion is probabilistic rather than deterministic. Okay. So classical mechanics does not work when you have particle mass very small and speed very high. Then motion tends to be better described by laws of probability. So it is probabilistic. So classical straight line or strict path motion is not well there. Okay, matter has a dual nature, can behave sometime like wave and sometime more like a particle, like photoelectric effect and these things. So matter basically has a dual nature, which is actually more visible if you go to the atomic and molecular level. That's why people before 1900s were not able to see it, because the effects are very small, right? Now, radiation is absorbed and emitted in a discrete fashion. That means either one photon is absorbed or no photon is absorbed. 5 can be absorbed, but there is nothing like 5.5. Okay. So this is the idea about electromagnetic theory. Now currently there are many theories, there are string theories and stuff. But what I am using string idea is only what I think is bound electron around a nucleus behaves like a string. That motion is described better that way. Free electron behave more like a particle. And the mostly quantum mechanics we do, it is influenced by classical particle idea. I mean, there are new theories, string theories, which have many dimensions and other things. I mean, this I am keeping very simple, basically 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, like what Einstein has used in the special relativity theory. So this was the revolution of 19th century, which of course modifies our idea philosophically, intellectually, very, very much compared to what was before 1900. 1900 ideas are not all wrong, but what happens is, you see, experiments provide us, if you like, extra eyes. We can see deeper by doing the experiment and trying to explain it. If you do no experiment, okay, bullet is moving 500 meters per second, it is moving in a straight line. Then you will never figure out what happens in atom. So I hope this explains things to maybe engineers and some physicists who start things, learning modern physics. What do you think? Any questions about?
Yeah, thank you very, very much. I think you have explained it in a rather good way.